Well, we're into Galatians chapter 4, our fourth week. We'll have one more week in Galatians. I don't think we will finish it. I was looking at it last night and thinking, I could do that. And then I remembered Marilyn's words, go slowly. So we will probably just do chapter 5, and then I'm going to be out of town for a couple weeks, and we'll finish it when I get back. There will still be Sunday school, but it will not be on Galatians. There'll be surprises. So feel free to keep. This is why Grant sits in the back, so I can't hear what he says. Please make sure that stays on the tape. I want everyone to hear that. So Galatians chapter 4, if you happen to read ahead, Galatians chapter 4 has some unusual things in it, some that are difficult to explain. And so if you remember last week, there was one specific verse where I bailed out and brought in outside sources to say this is really hard to understand. These aren't quite that difficult, but for the casual reader, chapter 4 can be either confusing or disconnecting. Many times when people are reading and they don't understand something, instead of trying to figure it out, you just kind of skip over it. The problem that happens then is your brain actually still goes in this loop trying to figure out what you left behind. And so if you ever finish reading a page and you go, I have no idea what I just read, normally it's you hit something and then your brain wandered off and your eyes kept going. So Galatians 4 can be a little bit that way. We'll work our way through it here as best we can. Do a real quick catch-up, though we are all on the same page. Remember, Paul started off saying, I'm astonished you are so quickly deserting the one who called you and turning to a different gospel. And that I keep bringing that line up, and I will for the rest of Galatians. This is what Paul's addressing. That this group in Galatia, this set of folks who were not Jewish to start off, had met Jesus and then are turning to a different gospel. He's not saying they're turning to a kind of a little bit of a sideways theology. He's saying that the gospel that they're turning to is not the gospel of Jesus Christ. He said, I did not receive the gospel that I was teaching you from any man, nor was I taught it. I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. And everything from there on, he's basing on that understanding. He's saying that I heard this from Jesus' mouth, not that I made it up or I heard it from the disciples. I have been entrusted with the task of preaching the gospel to the uncircumcised, just as Peter had been to the circumcised. So they have two separate camps. They have two separate fields of evangelism, the Jews and the non-Jews. And Paul's job had been to take the gospel to the non-Jews. And then in verse 21 of chapter 2, he says it as clearly as he can. If righteousness could not be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing. And that's what's at stake here for Paul, and why Paul is so hardcore about this is an absolute waste of the death of Christ if the things that they are believing are true. Then he goes so far as to say to the foolish Galatians in the beginning of chapter 3, who has bewitched you? That they've actually, in his wording, and somehow captured in a spell of spiritualism, and that they're being led astray. Before your very eyes, Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed as crucified. I would like to learn from you, did you receive the Spirit by works of the law? And that's the balance that here and in Romans and other places. Is it the law or by faith? Did you receive the Spirit by works of the law or by believing what you heard? Yes, Betty?
Well, I don't have a question. I just have a comment. I never realized until this time how significant it is that Paul received the gospel by revelation from Jesus directly.
Yes.
I don't think I thought that was that important till now, but it really is crucial.
Yeah, he's not parroting something else.
Because what he had revealed, then he brought to the disciples later, and they agreed that what he'd been given was the truth.
Yes. Yeah, which is one of those things where it's you hear from Paul that what he heard was the same thing that the disciples were teaching, with some little variance, only because the disciples had sort of been sucked back in.
Yeah, I mean, it was as pure as what the disciples experienced
in person.
Jesus himself.
Yes, yeah, it's very, very much
I
important.
understood the importance of that before.
So we're on to verse 5 and 6 of chapter 3. So again I ask, does God give you his Spirit and work miracles amongst you by the works of the law? And he's going to pound on this works of the law, or by believing what you heard. He's given them two choices. Was it the law that got you here? Was it the law that you've seen working? Or was it your faith that you've seen working? So also Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. And understand then that those who have faith are children of Abraham. And now he's setting up this argument that he's going to lead us all the way into what we're seeing today, that Abraham's faith, those who have faith are children of Abraham, which ultimately will make them children of God. And so the children of Abraham Jewish mentality was, I'm Jewish, I'm a child of Abraham. And we see in the early New Testament that both John the Baptist and Jesus come at the Pharisees and say, you are not Abraham's children, even though you're Jewish. And Paul is, even though he wasn't there for that, has this exact same theme, that the children of Abraham are based on faith, not on bloodline. For all who rely on the works of the law are under a curse. Clearly, no one who relies on the law is justified before God, because the righteous will live by faith. And Paul brings in Old Testament after Old Testament verse to support what he's saying. And then he gets to this point, and we're coming close now to moving into chapter 4. Let me take an example from everyday life. And he uses an example of human nature so that we can try to understand it. So he goes allegorical for a little while. Before the coming of this faith, we were held in custody under the law, locked up, until the faith that was to come would be revealed. So the law was our guardian until Christ came, that we might be justified by faith. So the law kept people and walked by people, was ever present with people. That sense of guardianship was there, keeping them aware of their absolute separation from God. Their sinfulness could not be absolved by anything that the law had. So the law was our guardian until Christ came, that we might be justified by faith. Now that this faith has come, we are no longer under a guardian. So in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God. And he makes that connection now, that not just children of Abraham, but children of God through faith. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. And that's the promise that was given to Abraham. And ultimately would become the new covenant. So that gets us to chapter 4. It's unfortunate in my mind sometimes. I almost said I don't like the Message Bible. The Message Bible doesn't give verses and chapters. It gives it chapter segments and nothing else. The verse breakdown and the chapter breakdowns are very random. And this one is. To start chapter 4 here makes very little sense, if any at all. So this line is immediately following what he was just giving example of several verses back in chapter 3, verse 15, where he's talking about the estate. Let me give you an example of this covenant that's been made, an estate law that's been made for a underage person. So now he's going to continue on that. What I'm saying is that as long as an heir is underage, he is no different from a slave. So he's referencing this culture that they had, and it's still similar in our society today, not slave, but having no legal rights to estates. When a will or a testament is there and the parent dies and the parent's gone and the child is underage, the estate is managed either by an appointed state manager or by the state itself. The person who's going to get the inheritance has no right, even though it's theirs. And it's a weird law. It has to do with protecting a person when they're young. Paul's not interested in that. What he's interested in is that as long as this heir who's going to get everything is underage, he's the same as a slave. A slave could have property willed to them and still have no control over it in the entirety of their law. It would then later perhaps be used to buy their freedom or other things, but it was all managed externally. So as long as an heir is underage, he's no different from a slave, although he owns the whole estate. He's going to say here in a little bit that he's talking allegorically. It's clear that he is. And what he's trying to get us to see is even prior to Christ, there's this estate that's been set up, this ownership that's been set up, but it hasn't matured yet. And that's where this is heading. Verse 2, the heir is subject to guardians and trustees until the time set by his father. My dad left some money when he passed away to my kids, and he put a provision on it that they wouldn't have access to it till they were 25. That was his choice. He could have not have access till they were 75 if he wanted to. And once it's set, it's unalterable. There is no one who can come in from the outside once he's passed and change that. And this is what this is talking. The heir is subject to the guardians and trustees until the time set by his father. So also, when we were under age, we were in slavery under the elemental spiritual forces of the world. So we were under age, we were in slavery, we were not yet under the new covenant. We are in slavery. In your Bible, there's several translations. If you look up on the screen where it says, under the elemental spiritual forces of the world. Example A of confusing for us. It's a single term that's translated this way. It only shows up a couple of times in everything that Paul writes, and it's different each time. The term can be used for anything that has to do with elemental or basic things. So this, where it says that the elemental spiritual forces of the world, it could also mean that they're in slavery under the ABCs of spirituality. It could be translated as the simple spiritualisms that have always existed. What he's trying to communicate is that when we're underage, remember he's a Jew and he's talking to Gentiles, and so they were not under the law when they were born. But he was under law. Paul was. And so you could be in either place. But what Paul's trying to communicate here is that before you become of age, you're in slavery to whatever spiritualism you're engaged in, because it hasn't matured to faith in Christ. That's what this is trying to say. It is intending to communicate that there are spiritual truths, spiritual realities in the creation that aren't Jesus. So there's all kinds of spiritualism out there that are very basic, very elemental. They're everywhere in society, and here they are. So I'd ask if that makes sense, but if it doesn't, I got nothing more for you. So if that doesn't make sense, it's just saying there's some simple spiritualism out there that they were bound to and not yet matured into Christ's time. But when the set time had fully come, and Paul's using this statement, a set time in its fullness, that God made a decision to have Jesus come at the right time. It's always been a question. Well, why would God not have Jesus come when Abraham was there, so that everybody could be under that? Why not have God come, or Jesus come when Adam, just have him right then and there? Have Adam sacrifice Jesus, and we'd have had a system all the way along. Why wait until year 33? Why wait till the middle of the captivity? Why not wait until the captivity of Jerusalem or of Israel? Why not do there's all kinds of legit questions that we have no answer to. All Paul's saying is the time had fully come. It was exactly the right time. Historians now look backwards and go, it was a perfect time for this faith to develop because of the transportation systems that the Romans had brought in and the sort of position that the Jews had been put in. And so you can look at it and go, there's lots of good reasons. And a lot of history lived without Jesus. So you could go, well, there's a lot of bad reasons. All we get to know is it was the exact, perfectly set time had come. God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law. If we look at verses 4 and 5 and 6 almost everything we believe in terms of Christology and what Jesus accomplished is right here. God sent his son, Jesus is divine, born of a woman, human, born under the law, connected to the Abraham bloodline, to redeem those under the law that we might receive adoption to sonship. To redeem means to buy back, that this divine human, under the law person bought us back because we were stuck under the law, that we would receive adoption. We're not just bought, but we're adopted into the family, and we're not just adopted children, we're absolute sons and daughters of God. It's all packed into those two verses. Because you are his sons, God sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, and now we have the Trinity doctrine arriving again. Paul teaches very little on the Trinity in terms of what it looks like. It's assumed in Paul's mind that you have known God the Father, you have met Jesus the Son, and you have been filled with the Holy Spirit, because that's all part of the process, and it's all part of who God is. Because you are his sons, God sent his Spirit of his Son into your hearts, not just as an accompaniment, but as an indwelling presence in your life. The Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. And that's the primary term that Jesus used to address the Father, Abba. This loving, intimate, unconditional relationship that the Holy Spirit allows us to have with God. Verse 7, so you are no longer a slave. Remember, we just came out of that you were a slave to these previous things. You're no longer a slave, but God's child. And since you are his child, God has made you also an heir. So this theme of slavery that came in back in chapter 3, he's summing up now. He's going to put a period on it, even though he'll go back again. But he's saying, I'm done with my argument. If you are a follower of Jesus Christ in the right gospel, you are no longer a slave. And this is why he gets so baffled, because anybody who's set free from slavery would certainly not choose to go back. Yes, Janine.
So where it says that Jesus was born under the law, just like all the rest of the people.
All of Judaism, yes.
So would he have been at that time, even though his family knew who he was, was he bound by that?
Yes, he was fully subject to the law, and the only one who fulfilled it.
Yeah, because I always focused on that he was like us. He had these emotions. He had, he was restrained, and that, only did what the Father told him in that regard. But I never looked at that he was born under the law, what that meant. That was another level of.
He was in the same slavery in the context of obligation to the law, but because of who he was, unflawed, then the consequence of the law never had its impact on him until he dies. When he's crucified, the cost of the law is paid in him because he's the only one who can pay it, because he's fulfilled it. So the outcome of death is the same. It's death for him in a different setting and context and a different purpose.
When you say that he fulfilled the law, when he says that,
yes,
I'm not. I think I get it, but I'm not altogether sure I'm clear about
how he says
he fulfilled it. I know he was without sin.
Well, when he says he's the fulfillment of it, what he's saying is he's actually going to pay the only final price for it.
Okay.
So he's going to be, because remember, the law points out sin and demands a cost that no one can actually pay. So we substitute in sheep and doves and pigeons and things. And so Jesus is going, his fulfillment is, I'm going to pay the debt. Yeah, and so the fulfillment of it is twofold. He dies, which is the consequence of everyone else, but he pays it, which is what no one else could do.
Yeah, I was reading a little commentary about Jesus touching the leper when he healed him, which meant that he was supposed to go and be cleansed if he touched a leper.
Yeah.
But he never did that.
Right.
And in the commentary, I read that his holiness overcame any need for cleansing.
Yes, although some would have said no until they understood who he was, and that's why some people thought he was functioning outside the law.
Well, that's why they thought that.
Yeah. But he was not bound by it.
He didn't need cleansing.
Yes, he did not need cleansing. On to chapter 4, verse 4. But when the time had full... Oh, wait, I already read that. So you are his child... Oh, I went backwards because of Gene's connection. So now we'll move on to 8. Formerly, when you did not know God, so he's saying you had this period of time where you might have thought you knew God, you had some knowledge of a God, whatever. You were slaves to those who by nature are not gods. And again, a little bit confusing. We've got to remember these people are Hellenistic Greco-Roman people who would have grown up under a Greek and Roman god system and felt some level of obligation. This is a time period where the Greek and Roman god system is sort of collapsing in some ways. People don't understand it, but they still feel bound by it. They're still frightened by it. They have this religiosity and things that they try to do to make things work. And so they were slaves, not to the law side of things, but to the spiritual things side of things. And he's saying here, those who by nature are not gods, meaning that any of those gods are not actual gods. They're simply figments of religious imagination. Yes, Tom?
Is that reflecting the same idea that he said in verse 3, we were in slavery under the elemental spiritual forces?
Yes. Yeah, and what Paul, I think, would say is all of these God systems developed out of these elemental spiritualisms. Some people believe he is saying that there are demonic spirit forces creating these belief systems to draw people to every other possible thing. There's definitely a sense of spiritual power involved, but dead power as opposed to Christ power. Verse 9, but now that you know God, and he makes this interesting little set-in, or rather are known by God, then why make that statement? Partly, nobody actually knows God. We know God. We knew God to a degree, but God's so vast, we don't actually know him. I mean, there's lots. I don't know you, right? I have a certain amount of knowledge of each of you, but in terms of real knowledge, very limited. And our limited knowledge of God is enough for us to love him and care for him and commit to him, but we still don't know him. But what is equally saying is that it's equally important that God is the one who knew you first. That he has connected in a knowing, indwelling way with you. And that's important to Paul, that it's not simply a cerebral knowledge. It's an indwelling and initiated knowledge by God. How is it that you are turning back to those weak and miserable forces? And this is referencing back to those gods and spiritual things that had no power to them. Do you wish to be enslaved by them all over again? Obvious answer to this question? Seems like it. Paul wants there to be an obvious answer to this question. What he's dealing with is what is so often the challenge when somebody gets sidetracked, is getting them to understand the sidetrack. Any human being would say, no, of course I don't want to be enslaved again. But when I start to believe something that is enslaving me, but I think that it's right, it seems right, and I don't see it the way that Paul would describe it. And this is why he hits it over and over again and uses analogies and uses direct statements to say, look, I know you've been persuaded on this. Please see what's actually happening, which is so hard for us to do. Once we get something in our mind and our ship is in a certain direction, it's very hard to adjust it. And it's why making sure you're staying with truth is so important, because it's so hard to get off of marginalized truth. It's not abject defiance of Jesus. That's not what's happening here. They have not walked away from Jesus. They've just started following a ghost of Jesus, a false image of Jesus, and it seems right to them, and it's very hard to connect back up again. So now he says this, and this is kind of a little bit challenging because of some other things he said we'll take a look at. You are observing special days and months and seasons and years. So he might be talking about the Sabbath requirement that they have started to observe. They might be talking about other holy days, a Feast of the Tabernacles, which is longer, a Passover, a Jubilee. Might be talking about pagan days and things that people have connected up over the course of time. And he says about that, I fear for you that somehow I have wasted my efforts on you. Paul inserts very frequently his concern. Have I actually lost you? Have you gotten to the place where I cannot bring you back? So we have to take a pause here, though, because Paul just got through saying that you're observing, special days and months, and we look at Romans 14, 5 and 6, which I just put up on the screen, one person considers one day more sacred than another, and another considers every day alike. Each of them should be fully convinced in their own mind. Whoever regards one day as special does so to the Lord. And you might see those two and go, well, Paul apparently changed his mind about special days. That somehow Paul has come around and gone, okay, well, you can have special days. I was a little hard on them in Galatians. Not at all. The difference is that what's happening in Galatia is that they are integrating days as requirements for right positioning with God. That they are taking days in the same way that they would call circumcision absolutely necessary. Now they would be considering that following the Feast of the Tabernacles is a requirement. And that if you don't have the Sabbath, remember how binding the Sabbath was before Jesus? That they are bringing that back in and they're connecting it to your ability to be in relationship with God. In Romans, what Paul is talking about is a different path that is going there, that there are people who have created and engaged in celebrations that are not religious requirements, but religious focuses. So they're very different. For me to celebrate Judy's birthday is for me to decide I want to remember that day and remind myself of how important she is to me, and I'm so glad that her parents liked each other and all that kind of stuff, as opposed to saying, if I don't honor her birthday, I don't have a relationship with her. She has right to divorce me if I don't get her a birthday card. Something to that level, where it's the requirement versus the focus. So we all, well, not all of us, but if we consider Easter a day that we do some things differently, that's what Paul's talking about in Romans 14. If we taught, if you are not up by sunrise on Easter, Easter does not count for you, then we have a problem, right? The requirement versus the practice. Yes, Steve?
It'd be very much like setting aside a day for fasting and prayer for a mission trip.
Yes.
Unto the Lord.
Yes. And if we said that your position with Christ is whether your name's on that list. Now, don't hear me wrong. Sign up. But yes, but same thing. That if once it becomes a requirement of connection with God, it's gotten out of bounds. And that's what Paul's talking about in Galatians and what they are doing. They're creating religious requirements as opposed to momentary memorials or whatever. So now his words shift to, remember he was pretty harsh early on. Then he at one point refers to them as brothers and sisters, and he's going to do it a couple more times here. And he's shifting his words to, I plead with you. He's giving his pastoral side is coming in now over the top of his evangelical side, his evangelistic side, and saying, listen, this is a loving plead that he's issuing here. I plead with you, brothers and sisters, become like me, for I became like you. And this is not an arrogant statement. There's another place where Paul says, do the things you see me doing. Again, not arrogant. But this is not the same as that one. When Paul says, do what you see me doing, he's doing an encouragement on how to practice your ministry. Here he's saying, we have a relationship. Become like me in my devotion to Christ in the same way that I became like you in my devotion to you. Paul was very devoted and engaged and in relationship with these people. It was not remember he wrote Romans. He'd never met them. He knew a few of them by name and a few had traveled, but he was not part of that church. But he wrote to them. He knew these people. This is like Jerry with the people in Ukraine, the deep, intimate relationships. He says to them, you did me no wrong. So he was there and he was not offended or hurt or misunderstood or judged in any way at that point. You did me no wrong, past tense, when I was there, because he's going to say something different here in a minute. As you know, it was because of an illness, and this is another challenging and at one point almost graphic piece here. He says, as you know, it was because of an illness that I first preached the gospel to you. And even though my illness was a trial to you, you did not treat me with contempt or scorn. all kinds of speculation. If you like to just have nothing to do but read random possibilities, go read about this section, because you've got people who think maybe he had malaria, people who think he had an eye disorder, people who think that he had a mental tic of some sort, that he had any number of possible things, palsy, and there's one that I think makes a little more sense, and I'll tell you here in a second, but absolutely meaningless other than interesting. But what we do know is he had some illness that got him there. This verse is not intended to teach on healing, but it's a fascinating statement here that he was traveling ill for a period of time. God actually did deliver him from it. Certainly he'd been prayed about it, etc., but it was over God's timetable that this took place. And there's this purpose of Paul being ill when he arrives at the Galatians. First of all, it got him there, and it created a connection that he would not have had that not happened. So, different teaching, but an interesting place here if you ever are studying healing and God's use of when things seem different than they should. So, they did not treat him as an object of contempt or scorn. Instead, he welcomed me as if I were an angel, and then goes so far as to say, as if I were Christ Jesus himself. So his welcome there is almost unstatably positive. Where then is your blessing of me now? You can see that there's a big change in what his perception of their relationship with him is. And this is what happens in division, theological division, waywardness in faith. It always creates division among people, always. And Paul is saying here, we used to have this, and now you've been brought into this mentality that's not truthful. It's not the gospel. And what's the byproduct of that? You've demonized me. And that's what's happened. I can testify, and he's talking about when he was there, I can testify that if you could have done so, you would have torn out your own eyes and given them to me. And so for me, I think the only thing that makes any sense to me here is, because Paul almost always connects stuff, is that he had something wrong with his eyes. That he had some sort of eye infection that was prolonged, and in those days, eye infections could be very goopy and crusty and gnarly looking. There's a description in one commentary of an eye thing that they had that would cause your eyes to bulge and hang and all kinds of stuff, and that would definitely put someone in the "I'll talk to you later" category if they'd met me. But they welcomed him. And I won't go any further into it. And so he says, you would have torn your own eyes out and given them to me. Where then is that blessing? Now, have I now become your enemy by telling you the truth? And if you've been around church and Christian life very long, you've seen this exact same thing happen. That there's a disagreement and you're demonized. You're now the enemy. And you come back and try and speak truth to me, and you are the worst possible person to be communicating. The pain that Paul's feeling here is very clear. Now he's going to talk about who's causing it. Those people are zealous to win you over. And now there's another interesting thing when we start talking about outside sources trying to draw people out of the faith. They're trying to win you over, but for no good. Look at this. What they want is to alienate you from us. And this is not a human tactic. This is a devil tactic. Do everything you can to alienate the source of truth. Do everything you can to get these people to discard the one place that can bring them back into. Paul's the only one who's going to write them. He's the one who brought them in, and he's the only one that's going to go after them. And so what's happening in this spiritual battle is the zealous people that are trying to win them over aren't trying to win them over for their own good, but because they want to alienate you from the truth. Yes?
This makes so much of the stuff he said back in chapter 2 and chapter 1, where it felt like there was this undercurrent that sounded a little bit arrogant, where he's saying, no, seriously, you guys, you have to believe me, I'm right here.
Mm-hmm.
Makes so much more sense, because it wasn't even just theoretical, it was happening with the Galatians too.
Yeah. Yes, no, the intensity, when you have read actually you only have to get through chapter 4. When you get through chapter 4, the intensity that Paul has throughout it should be clear. There's so much at stake here. And Paul would say the least important thing is his relationship with them. While it's very important to him, it's the least important thing. It's ultimately their eternal destination that's at stake. And that's what he's fighting so hard for and speaking so intensely and focused for. What they want is to alienate you from us so that you may have zeal. What? For the truth? No. For Jesus? No. For them. And we want a sign of a cult. The intention appears to be Christ, but is always the organization. You have to be in or you're out. And this is what's happening here. Some people have said this is the first true Christian cult that's coming in and spreading around. There's all kinds of cultic and heretical ideas, but this group trying to draw you in for their sake, not for truth's sake. There are a lot of battles over truth. This one is not. Paul's saying this. We're not talking about truth. We're talking about us. I'm trying to keep you saved, trying to keep you attached to Jesus, and they're trying to draw you into a club, and that's what's going on. And so then he says, and this is another place where it's a little bit funny, it's fine to be zealous, provided the purpose is good. Now, there's zeal in here 2 previous times. Those people are zealous to win you over, then so that you might have zeal for them. But then he says it's fine to be zealous, provided the purpose is good, and to be so always, not just when I am with you. So the question is it fine to be zealous? Is he referencing them? Because the phrase in the grammatical statement appears that he's referencing them. If you take a look at in a grammar format, it looks like he's referencing them. But it's absolutely absurd to think that he would be saying that their zeal is okay. And he's not just refining it and saying it's so fine to be zealous, provided the purpose is good, because then he says, and to always be so it's clearly about them, to always be so, not just when I'm with you. What he's doing is he's doing a juxtaposition of saying there's zeal going on, and you used to have it, don't have it like them. Don't allow your zeal to drag you into the wrong place. Having zeal, is it Proverbs 19:2 that says zeal without knowledge is dangerous, and in one translation it says leads to death. Zeal has to be informed, and then it can be good. And what he's saying here is you had it, and you've lost it, and now you're falling subject to theirs. So the wording here is a little funny because sometimes Greek's hard to get into English. Now he adds more of his heart again, referring them to my dear children. So he's shifted even further, and it's not manipulative language. It's him sharing his heart and feelings, and you'll see it here. For whom I am again in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. There's a reconnection to that first struggle to lead them to truth. His evangelism heart went there and fought to get them into the kingdom. And now they've slipped to the edge, and he's having to go back. So he's saying, I am again going through the pains of childbirth. And it's intentional language. I'm trying to create life, actual life. I need Christ formed in you again for that to happen. How I wish I could be with you and change my tone because I am perplexed about you. Again, a hard translation to do. How I wish I could be with you, that part's fairly clear, and change my tone. And what he's trying to say there is that if we were together and our relationship started to pull us back in, we would be more in harmony, more in sync. And because this letter clearly has a feel of tension to it and confrontation to it. But he clearly can't just fly there like we could now. It's a long ways, and he knows he can't go. But he's saying, I wish I could be there, and my tone would be able to be changed because of our connection, because I'm absolutely perplexed. And that word perplexed there is, we don't have a good word for it. We might say baffled. Perplexed is maybe the best one, I don't know. But it has to do with absolutely stumped. I can't fathom how this has taken place, is what he's trying to communicate. Verse 21, tell me, you who want to be under the law, are you not aware of what the law says? So he's going to go back one more time through this understanding of law, and so we're going to go through it fairly quickly. Tell me, you who want to be under the law, are you not aware of what the law says? And this it can throw people off trying to understand it. For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons. We know that, Ishmael and Isaac, by Hagar and Sarah. One by the slave woman and the other by the free woman. So there's a woman who's a slave has a son, the woman who's free has a son. And so you got two sons. His son by the slave woman was born according to the flesh. There was no faith involved in it. That's what he's saying. When he slept with Hagar, it was because he was actually aborting his faith for a period of time. But his son by the free woman was born as the result of a divine promise. Faith, not faith. Now he says as clearly as he can, these things are being taken figuratively, metaphorically, symbolically. He's setting this out. He's not wanting them to directly connect to the story. He's wanting them to directly connect to what that story represents. It's a true historical story, and it can be allegorical. And so it is. So here we go. The women represent two covenants. One covenant is from Mount Sinai and bears children who are to be slaves. This is Hagar. This is as clear and straightforward as he can state these things, and yet it's still somewhat fuzzy for us. Now, Hagar stands for Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present city of Jerusalem. I'll cover this in a minute if you have a question, because I would too. Because she is in slavery with her children. So now, if you watch on screen, I'll read it if you're listening along here. There's two columns that are taking place. There's the slave and no faith column, and then there's the free, God-called faith column. Here they are. On the left, Hagar, the slave woman. On the right, Sarah, the free woman. On the left, Ishmael, born naturally through regular relations. Isaac's supernatural birth should have never happened. It wasn't possible biologically, but it takes place because of Abraham's faith. The old covenant represented on the left under Hagar and Ishmael. The new covenant in Christ represented under Sarah and Isaac. The earthly Jerusalem, which has disastrous history under it on the left side. The heavenly Jerusalem, the ultimate end line for things on the right. Judaism on the left, Christianity on the right. This is what he's trying to represent in what he's just described, saying that this is allegorical or symbolic, whatever word you want. And then he uses, again, Old Testament stuff to tie that together. But the Jerusalem that is above is free. And this is where he has to help them understand it. She is our mother. It's a weird for us phraseology, but the mother is very different symbolism than God the Father. It's not saying it is created or birthed, but has this sort of caring, shepherding piece to it. So, for it is written, and they be glad, barren woman. This is Isaiah 54:1. Be glad, barren woman, you who never bore a child, shout for joy and cry aloud, you who were never in labor, because more are the children of the desolate woman than of her who has a husband. And some would say that what Paul's doing is prophetically speaking that Christianity will surpass Judaism soon, that those that are born from the barren, desolate woman but coming from faith are going to surpass the things that are natural processes and religious things that take place. So, getting very close to the end here. Now you, brothers and sisters, like Isaac, the woman, the child of faith, are children of promise. At that time, the son born according to the flesh persecuted the son born by the power of the Spirit. So, in Genesis chapter 1, Ishmael mocks Isaac. Isaac's 16 years younger or something like that. I can't remember the exact age gap, but when Isaac's very young, Ishmael mocks him. And what happens ultimately is that Sarah wants Hagar and Ishmael sent away so that they can't harass the true son, the rightful son that's supposed to be there. At that time, the son born according to the flesh persecuted the son born by the power of the Spirit. It is the same now. And what he's saying is that this new church that's following Christ is going to be persecuted by all kinds of outside sources. It is the same now. But what does Scripture say? Get rid of the slave woman. And he's saying right now, as directly as he can, get rid of those people who are giving you this information. Get rid of them, because they're not speaking truth and they're dragging you to hell. Get rid of the slave woman and her son. That's what Sarah did with Hagar. For the slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with the free woman's son. But the implication is it can pollute it. It can corrupt it. So we've got to get it removed. Therefore, brothers and sisters, we are not children of the slave woman, but of the free. And that therefore is referencing very specifically that get rid of the slave woman. If you do, if you get rid of the slave woman, if you get rid of that belief system, brothers and sisters, then you are not children of them, but you are making a choice to be if you keep her around. If you do what I've said, then you are continue to be a child of the free woman, which is a child of God and faith. So we're a little bit past time, but any questions quickly on that? That's in many minds like mine, that's one of the most confusing chapters in terms of kind of piece by piece by piece. Like, ooh, this is weird, and there's a hard turn here, and some difficult Greek. So anything, question? Okay, if you do have one, please let me know. Two things I'm going to ask you to do for next week. First, for the first time, read Galatians chapters 1 all the way through 5. It will help you understand 5 to have the context of 1 through 4 in there. Here's the second. I've never done 2 homeworks before, but this time. The very first verse in chapter 5 is for freedom that Christ has set us free. And here's my question for you over this next week. What does he mean by that? What is Paul trying to get you to? It's an often quoted verse. We often quote it in terms of addiction or difficulties in our faith or any number of things. But in terms of when Paul wrote it, what's he trying to say? It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. And we will finish up there. God, thanks for today. Ask that this is helpful and produces growth for us in our commitment to maintaining our faith in the one true God. And for our desire, Lord, to not fall victim to the same spiritual forces that are out there now that try to lead us in all kinds of different directions that aren't you. Pray, Lord, that we would stay true to your word, that our hearts would be owned by you, that would guard us from error that would harm us. Bless these friends. Thanks for them in Jesus' name. Amen.